Hello, friends. Uncle Marv here with a special news report here on the IT Business Podcast, the show for IT professionals and managed service providers. Today, we are talking about a recent lawsuit that has been put out in the news, and it's been out for a couple of weeks, and I think that it's significant enough that it needs to be discussed. So a little bit later, I'm going to be bringing on David Sims to chat about that. But let me go ahead and get into the details. And in a sense, here's what it is. Molecular Testing Labs, a precision laboratory diagnostics company, has filed a lawsuit against Ntirety, its managed IT services provider, following a significant data breach. So just to give you a quick little idea, so Molecular Testing Labs is a mission-driven health sciences company specializing in precision laboratory diagnostics. It is headquartered in Vancouver, Washington. The company employs, says between 201 and 500 professionals, including clinicians, PhDs, doctors, research scientists, and diagnostic technicians. In recent years, MTL, that is the acronym we're going to give it, has gained recognition for its social impact, ranking number 32 out of 185 companies in the 2024 Real Leaders Top Impact Companies list, highlighting their efforts to increase the accessibility and affordability of clinical diagnostics. Ntirety is a managed IT services provider that specializes in security, compliance, and infrastructure management. And they were formed in 2019 through a merger of two companies, Hostway and Hosting. Ntirety positions itself as a leading managed cloud services provider, pioneering the next generation of IT for the modern agile enterprise. They are based in Austin, Texas. They employ approximately 250 people and reported an annual revenue in 2024 of $84 million. So now let's get into the lawsuit. Apparently, they established a relationship in September of 2018, entered into a HIPAA business associate agreement, otherwise known as a BAA. And under this agreement, Ntirety was designated as a business associate to Molecular Testing Labs, which is a covered entity under HIPAA regulations. The incident occurred on or around March 12th of 2025. Molecular Testing Labs received information about a material breach involving patient data that was supposed to be secured by Ntirety under their BAA. Now, of course, the results that we know about don't clarify how MTL first learned about this breach. The subsequent forensic investigation determined that Ntirety had experienced a ransomware attack, potentially from Russian threat actors, as suggested by their use of certain Cyrillic alphabet. MTL's investigation allegedly uncovered significant deficiencies, shortcomings, and omissions in Ntirety security procedures and practices that enabled the threat actors to access Ntirety's computer systems and, by extension, MTL's confidential patient data. Now, before I go any further, let me go ahead and bring into the studio here David Sims, founder, president of Security First IT, and host of the Help Me HIPAA podcast. David, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks, Marv.
So I tried to gloss over stuff pretty quickly there. There's a lot of information,
Right.
But before we get too far into it, let me just ask you, what are your first impressions of this lawsuit?
Well, looking at it just from what we know, because there's probably a lot of things we don't know that we have to kind of fill in the blanks, but looking at it, you have to ask yourself, what was in that business associate agreement? One of the things that MSPs often fail to really look at is the fact that that business associate agreement is not just HIPAA paperwork. It is a contract, and it has legally binding contractual obligations in it. And so whatever they agree to in that BAA is what they have to do during an incident like this.
Now, I want to clarify a couple of things because most managed service providers have something called a master service agreement or an MSA. And then the BAA would be a separate document. However, I know of some MSPs that just basically say my MSA will cover it. That's not the way HIPAA works, is it?
No, no, not at all. There are actual specific things and verbiage and sections that have to be in a business associate agreement. And sometimes, oftentimes, honestly, the business associate agreement could come from the other party. So if you're signing a business associate agreement with a covered entity, which is typically your client, they could provide that BAA to you. You can also provide it to them. HIPAA doesn't say who has to provide it, and OCR, we call them the HIPAA police. That's the Office for Civil Rights. They're the ones that enforce HIPAA. They don't care either. There just has to be that contract. It's just like any other contract. It doesn't matter who brings it to the table. It just has to be there. And it's the same way. So when you're dealing with vendors or you're dealing with your clients, there still has to be a business associate agreement in place if you fall under HIPAA regulations.
And what are the typical things that are in there besides, what each side is supposed to do?
I mean, for the most part, it's language like you will do everything that you can to protect the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of protected health information for your covered entity. You'll make sure that you have security protocols in place that match what HIPAA is asking you to do. You won't share, you won't use or disclose that data to anybody outside of your contractual obligations. You will notify us during a certain time frame should there be an incident or a data breach so that we can notify our patients or take proper action. It's language like that that's in there, and in particular in this incident here that we're talking about, one of the parts that kind of got brought into this is the indemnification piece of it. And you see these in normal contracts, but it is specifically within business associate agreements where it often says that you will, Mr. MSP, you will indemnify us and hold us harmless should there be some type of failure on your part that causes us to have a material data breach. And that's what they're saying here. They're saying, Mr. MSP, it was your fault that this happened. And because of that, you're liable for that cost that's involved in addressing this. And that cost was not covered and in this incident. And also when there was a conversation about cost, or excuse me, a conversation about helping MTL, which is the client, apparently the MSP said there's going to be an additional cost for that. Well, you can't say in your contract that you are indemnifying somebody and also I'm going to charge you for that.
All right. Yeah, the two sides there, obviously, and that may be a situation where one agreement says one thing, another agreement says another, but what matters to HIPAA, the OCR police, or the HIPAA police, as you call them, what's in that BAA, that takes precedence, it seems like. Another thing I wanted to bring up was the speed in which this happened.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, on or about March 12th is when this ransomware attack happened. And we are in May, and there's already a lawsuit. And in most cases, I'm thinking some of these ransomware attacks, if they're of a significant size, they're not even going to be resolved in the amount of time that we are here already. I mean, because the lawsuit was actually, when was that? That was filed in April. So it couldn't have been more than 30 to 45 days.
Yeah, and typically with a breach like that, especially ransomware, the organization is not going to be back up and running in that time frame anyway. You're looking at weeks and most of the time months of downtime. It doesn't mean you're 100% down, but the recovery time, the larger and more complex the environment, the longer that recovery time takes, and it can be substantial.
And the fact you and I talked briefly before this, and the fact that MTL got another forensic company to come in that time frame and assess all of this. That's pretty quick as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm making an assumption here, but my assumption is that since they were not getting communication from the MSP, they stepped it up a notch and said, okay, we need to figure out what's going on here and we need to handle this on our own. I'm assuming that they had ransomware machines sitting there. Like, we need this addressed. And so they called in a forensics company to come in and help with that. And of course, part of that response is finding things that they necessarily didn't want to find as far as the level of security that they thought they had from the MSP. Or it's kind of sounds like in the lawsuit that they're even saying the MSP itself did not have good security in place. It's hard to know. We don't have that assessment that came from the forensics folks, so I don't know exactly what they picked up on. But just in reading what we do know, it does sound that there were some things not only internal to NTL, but also in Ntirety in their own MSP that are trying to say that we're not up to speed, so to speak, to address the business associate agreement and to comply with HIPAA.
Yeah. So I want to go ahead and insert another disclaimer here. We had one on the screen at the beginning of the show. Neither David and I are lawyers. We are not associated with OCR, and we obviously cannot tell people or really truly advise people on how they should run their service provider company. But one of the things that I wanted to do is talk about the things that service providers can learn because of a situation like this. One of the things that sticks out to me is something that I've had to do with my company is tell people that, I'm not having you sign this contract just to be a jerk. I'm doing this because these are the requirements that are being forced, not just on you as the client, but me as well. I have to protect my company because I have to protect your company. So, whether it's HIPAA or NIST or CMMC, all of those things that we're now starting to do, the MSP, in my opinion, should also make sure that we are doing the same things that we're requiring our customers to do with multi-factor authentication and encryption and all of those sorts of things.
Right.
But it sounds like Ntirety. Now, granted, we don't know the details. We don't know what happened. We're speculating based on what is been put out in public information. But the fact that a company as large as Ntirety got hit, it's not unrealistic to think that could happen, right?
Oh no, not only is it not unrealistic, but it's happened before. I mean, we've got people that either some people are talking about it, like there's a gentleman that goes around and speaks at different conferences about his MSP that got hit in very much the same way, and how the MSP community pulled together to help him respond and mitigate that. And in fact, we interviewed him on our podcast probably a year or so ago at this point, and talked about how that felt and going through it, and what it looked like to get the community to step in and help with that. So it does happen, and it has happened, and it will happen again, unfortunately.
Another thing that came up, and we did not discuss this, but I just thought of it here, is one of the things I've also been telling my clients is that, it just escaped me now, of course. The fact that you mentioned OCR. There have been MSPs, there have been service providers, IT professionals that have done work without the business associate agreement. And some people that think that, well, I'll just do this part of the IT services and not worry about all of that other stuff. From what I understand, and it was kind of referenced in another article here, is that they don't care. If you touch their equipment, you are responsible whether you have the BAA or not, correct?
Yeah, it's the work you do that makes you a business associate, not the contract. And that's a good point you bring up. Some people think, well, if I don't sign this, then I'm not a business associate. And that's not true. You're a business associate because of the work you do. Now, that doesn't mean that just because you're an MSP that you're a business associate. It's very clearly stated that you have to either create, maintain, transmit, or receive protected health information that makes you a business associate. The argument that some MSPs will have is, well, I don't touch it, or I don't look at it, or I don't use it, or whatever the case might be. But if you're selling services around that, and a good one to point to is backup services. So you're doing backup services, you're reselling that service. So your client doesn't have a direct relationship with your backup vendor. They have to do that through you. So you're a conduit of that business, and you are moving their data from point A to point B. So you're transmitting the data to somebody else through your vendor. And because you're doing that, you are a business associate. You have to have a business associate agreement with your client, and you have to have a business associate agreement with that backup vendor as well.
Now, that's a point that you just brought up that I think a lot of us don't do, is we don't think about the agreement we have to have with our vendor. That reminds me of the lawsuit that's happening out in California with a client suing an MSP because of the backups being lost. And that company is suing both the provider and the vendor. And there's been no updates on that case, but at some point there will be, and we'll get back to that. But you're right. We need to make sure that the BAA is also upstream for us, because we're not actually doing a lot of the work. We're reselling services of those vendors.
Right. We are. And just think of it this way. Here's an easy way that I can demonstrate where you can have a violation of your own business associate agreement that's with your client. Let's say you have one with a backup vendor, and the backup vendor says, we're going to notify you in 60 days if there's a material breach. Well, let's say your BAA with your client says, we're going to notify you within 10 days. All right. You see the issue here? It's like, okay, is it 10 days from when it happened, or is it 10 days from when I know about it? And that's going to be a problem, because what you're supposed to do is notify within a certain time frame of when the incident occurred, not when you knew about it. It's when it occurred, or you should have known about it. So that's where you have to push back on some of that and tell the vendor a 60-day notification, although it is, viable by law, because the HIPAA says that you can notify within 60 days or without undue delay. And that's what people don't often tell you. They throw the 60 days out there, but they don't tell you the second part of that, which says without undue delay. So you can't just say, well, I wasn't ready to tell them yet, and I've decided just to wait as long as I possibly could. That's not going to fly. That'll get you in trouble.
Let me get my ducks in a row before I tell somebody what's going on.
And so you want to look at that, because if they're not going to tell you, within a certain time frame, and you're telling your client that you will tell them within another time frame, that could be very problematic, because you can't have everybody. Let's just say 60 days. If everybody says, well, I'm going to notify you in 60 days, then that means you got the vendor waiting 60 days, the MSP waiting 60 days, and then the healthcare entity waiting 60 days before they even notify the patients. That's crazy. If you think about that, that's what, 6 months.
Yeah.
It's 6 months out from a data breach, and that's not going to fly. OCR will be all over that.
Yeah. All right. Well, David, let's kind of wrap up here with some key takeaways. One of the ones that I want to start off with first is, you had made a comment earlier, HIPAA compliance appears to be non-negotiable, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. It applies to you based on the work you do, whether you sign anything or not.
All right. Contract terms, apparently they can, dramatically increase liability if you're trying to say that you've got certain SLAs and you don't meet them, and then all of these things about indemnification and all of that stuff. That's a pretty interesting concept that we need to think about as well.
Yeah, within your business associate agreement, there are certain language that has to be there, and then there are other things that is negotiable and also optional. And you have to understand what those are, or better yet, hire an attorney that understands what those are. But you should have a business associate agreement that you sign that is your upstream, so your clients, and then you should have a very different one that's downstream for your vendors. Now, often vendors are going to provide their own. Like, you're not going to get Google and Microsoft to sign your BAA. They're going to give you theirs, and then you're stuck with whatever that looks like. But you still need to audit that to see what you have and who you have them with, and you should have them with everybody. If your client gets audited or investigated, the first thing OCR is going to ask them, among other things, is, give me a list of your business associates, and I need to see the agreements that you have with all of them.
You strike an interesting point there, where if you're getting somebody else's BAA, obviously we need to know what's in it. I was going to talk about the fact that documentation is key, because we're seeing that even though there was documentation, there's no cooperation, it seems, or somebody didn't follow their guidelines. But you need to make sure that as an MSP, whatever you're getting as a BAA, can be implemented into your agreement as well, right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. Well, the stakes are high apparently because we don't know what the costs are associated with MTL asking for indemnification.
Yeah.
Um, it sounds like the larger the firm, the larger that amount of money is going to be.
Yeah, it's not uncommon, and this is something we didn't see a few years ago, but nowadays it's not uncommon to see within the business associate agreement that covered entities are now pushing these costs back on the business associates, or in this case, the MSP. So they're saying, for example, you have to cover the cost of the data breach response. You have to cover the cost of notifying patients. You have to cover the cost of forensics. All those things could be in there. If you're an MSP that's not reading that and not understanding that, you could be signing something that's going to be extremely expensive for you. And we have to have very different insurance for things like that. And we have to have very different risk management and planning that goes around that if those are the things we're going to sign. You know, MSPs used to say all the time, just sign the document and do the work. That is not something you should do. It is never something you should have done. You need to know what's in that contract. You need to be prepared for worst case scenario if something happens and you are contractually liable to do something that you said you're going to do.
All right. David, any other thoughts on what MSPs, service providers should know that we haven't brought up yet?
I mean, for one, you need to have some clear protocols on how you're going to respond to a situation like this. Doing instant response on the fly is not good for anybody. So have some type of instant response plan in place, and if nothing else, you should have a very, very clear way that you're going to communicate with clients. Crisis communication can happen before an incident. It should also happen during and after an incident, so that you have people who understand the expectations of what can happen, how that might look, and during that, you should be keeping them apprised of what's going on. Clients don't know necessarily that a data breach or a ransomware attack is going to take days or weeks. They think that you can have them back up and running within an hour, and that's not the case. And so if you're clear on those expectations early on, if something does happen, clients aren't caught unaware of what those expectations are and what you can do in within a reasonable and appropriate time frame.
All right. All right. Well, David, thank you for taking some time to chat with me about this and get some of these thoughts out about all the things that we should know. And we will be following this case very closely because it'll be interesting to see how it gets ruled, because that will affect all of us down the road.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on.
All right. That's going to do it, folks, for this episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. Stay tuned, subscribe, follow, do whatever you do on the social medias, and head over to itbusinesspodcast.com and put us in your favorite podcatcher. That's going to do it. We'll see you soon. And until next time, holla.